Trump loyalist Elise Stefanik filed a formal ethics complaint against the judge overseeing the former president's New York civil fraud trial. Stefanik wrote in a letter to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct that Judge Engeron has displayed a clear judicial bias against Trump and broken several rules in the state's judicial conduct code. The Congresswoman from New York wrote, quote, "This judge's bizarre behavior has no place in our judicial system, where Judge Engeron is not honoring the defendant's rights to due process and a fair trial." So in this complaint, Jessica, one of the main issues that Elise Stefanik takes with the judge's conduct is the fact that he issued this summary judgment prior to the trial, agreeing with a tax assessor's valuation of Mar-a-Lago at $18 million. And this has been a major point of contention that we've talked about on this show before as well, because the tax assessor's valuation of a property is almost always lower than a real estate valuation. And so using that as his valuation for Mar-a-Lago and ruling in favor of that assessment, I think already set the trial off on a bad bias start. Even CNN Business published an article where they talked to real estate experts who slammed the judge for his decision in valuing Mar-a-Lago between $18 and $27 million. Eli Baracha, who's the chair of the School of Real Estate at Florida International University, said appraisal values and market values are just not the same thing. It's a well-known fact. That's especially true for properties that are unique, and it's very easy to argue that this is a unique property. Dina Goldentire, who's an executive director of sales at Douglas Elliman in South Florida, said that the tax assessor's valuation isn't even considered in the ultra-luxury marketplace when trying to value a property. So people can question Elise Stefanik's motivation in bringing this complaint against the judge, but I think she has good standing.
To me, it feels a little disingenuous, this coming from Elise Stefanik. You have Judge Engeron being criticized for giving political contributions to campaigns. Judges give political contributions to campaigns all of the time. It's a very common practice. You also have judges making determinations when it comes to the value of property, when it comes to income that a person has. They hear a lot of cases regarding people paying child support. Judges are responsible for a lot of financial determinations. If the property was worth more than what his tax documents say, he should have been paying more in taxes and valued it higher. I think the rich circumventing taxes through having their properties valued less when they have to pay their property taxes is ridiculous. If Elise Stefanik really cared about the judicial system and the due process of law and how citizens are treated when they're brought before a court, whether or not they have a proper jury trial, she would be drafting legislation to reform how justice is brought in the United States. If you go into a courthouse and you listen in on arraignments for just everyday people who have been arrested the night before, you'll listen to people who have never been brought before a jury sentenced to stay in jail for multiple months at a time. They're taught or they're told by the judge to pay bail at whatever amount is set. If you have a private attorney, you can sit there and watch the judge ask the private attorney, what do you want bail to be set at? And the private attorney can go into the audience in the courtroom and say, how much money have you brought to bail him out? And then set bail at that exact amount. I've seen it happen time and again. They hear cases for citizens with a private attorney before those being represented by a public defender. It's just, to me, a little bit gross for someone in Congress in a position of power to focus so much of their energy on this case instead of drafting some kind of judicial reform legislation. To me, it feels incredibly dishonest to care far more about this case than the cases that are heard every single day before courts in the United States.
I think your point about the tax assessment, the tax valuation being too low, though, is not a recognition of the way the real estate market works, but the way you want it to work. And for me, that doesn't fly in a legal context. They're holding Trump to a standard that no other luxury property owner has been held to. Every single luxury property owner has a tax assessment value that is far lower than their real estate valuation. And that's the way the market has worked for a century. So the idea that he should be held accountable in court for a tax office's assessment of his property value, I think, is pretty ridiculous. Not to mention the fact that there's no victim in this case. The people who lended him this money based on his valuation of his Mar-a-Lago and New York properties were repaid in full. They got all of their interest back. So when you're having a fraud case, who was the person that was defrauded? And the judge hasn't identified a single victim in this case. She also points out some of Judge Engeron's less tangible behavior in terms of the way that he's smiling in front of the cameras and seems very excited about the attention he's receiving. I also think this complaint stems from, of all places, some reporting from Laura Loomer, the woman who once chained herself to the front of the Twitter building because she claimed she was censored. But her reporting is pretty irrefutable here. She has screenshots from the wife of Judge Engeron, Dawn Marie Engeron, where she's posting on Twitter, F Trump, and she has photos of the former president in an orange jumpsuit and is frequently replying to Trump allies with some very aggressive and explicit language. And after Laura Loomer reported on these screenshots, all of the other members of Judge Engeron's family who were on social media locked their accounts to prevent people from looking at them. So that, combined with his political donations, I think makes clear that this is a family that seems like they're out to get Trump.
To me, I have a hard time feeling bad for the luxury real estate owners who have their property valued according to the market rate rather than their tax rate, and then poor Trump comes along and has his valued at the rate which he pays taxes. I just don't feel bad about that when I think about judges based on their own discretion on an everyday basis. For people brought before the court who committed the same exact crime will face a completely different sentence based on who their judge is. That's how the criminal system works in the United States. And so if Elise Stefanik is quite upset about that, she should consider drafting legislation for judicial reform. I just have a hard time feeling bad for these folks who are luxury real estate owners and how their property is valued when everyday people who have committed petty theft in order to feed their kids because they've been excluded from the economic system are now put in jail for months at a time and lose their jobs, and kids are without a father before they've even had a trial by jury. And if we really cared about the actions of judges in the United States, I think Elise Stefanik would put her focus on Clarence Thomas, who's taking a bunch of money from Harlan Crow, who has Venmo transactions between his aide and folks close with the attorneys who are having cases heard before the Supreme Court in the weeks and months to come. It's insane the amount of flexibility that's given to justices that are on the conservative side. But then you have the judges that are hearing Trump's cases that are under immense scrutiny. It's just when the same scrutiny isn't applied across the board to all judges and the same defense is not given to all plaintiffs, it just feels very dishonest to me.
I don't think you have to feel bad for Trump to acknowledge, though, that he is being held to a different standard and to have concern that that could be due to the politicization of the justice system. I mean, the idea that you could go after your political opponents by holding them to a different standard than all of their compatriots, all of their I guess you could say colleagues in the luxury real estate market industry. I don't think you have to say I have sympathy for people who might have to pay a big fine because we believe they defrauded investors. But I do think there has to be an acknowledgement that this could be due to political bias. And having a politically biased justice system is not just bad for Trump, it's bad for all Americans. And when we see the Biden administration raiding a pro-life activist's home in front of his children and accusing him of violating the FACES Act for defending his son, while meanwhile they didn't do anything in regards to the illegal protests outside of Supreme Court justices' homes in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, which they are illegal in Virginia, to try to sway or intimidate justices through protest. That's a double standard, and it's one that's done based on politics. And I don't want to live in a country where political bias is what runs the Justice Department. I don't want the government to be acting in terms of its political underpinnings or who happens to be president when they're deciding who to prosecute.
I think it's a problem just as much it's a problem that the judicial system in the United States is both classist and racist. If you can't afford to post $3,000 bail, are you automatically required to now serve a sentence to stay in jail for months? That's not how our Constitution suggests it should happen. But frequently it is the case, and it follows the line of class, whether or not you can afford to post cash bail or not. So now you're punished for being poor in the United States. And it also very obviously follows the line of race in the United States, with disproportionately African Americans being put in jail. And so it feels like more of the same. When you have the justice system seemingly be unfair across political lines, the amount of discretion that our judges have in the supposed system of justice, I would call it a penal system in the United States, is far too much. And the way we read that out, I don't think it's a lot of what neoliberals are proposing, to use AI to make decisions about arraignments and judicial decisions that are very common. I think really we need more legislation to regulate how the court system works in the U.S., because it's strayed so far away from the U.S. Constitution that it's absolutely insane. I think it's equally a problem that a judge can make a determination, perhaps based on their political persuasion, as they could based on how they feel about race or how they feel about the character of the plaintiff before the court. It feels unfair to me, and it feels like it's not following our Constitution's stipulation that you need a trial by jury, that everyone has a right to that. And so to me, it feels wrong to be more mad about Trump being on trial than you are about the everyday cases that are heard in the United States of America. And Elise Stefanik is in a position of power to do something about it. And it just feels dishonest that, she's not proposing legislation and it is instead trying to specifically focus on this one judge.
If Elise Stefanik were to support mandatory minimums and 3 strike laws, would you say that she is helping to reform the judiciary system, in the sense that judges would have less say over the outcome of a plaintiff's, or rather a defendant's conviction?
No, I think if she proposed that all cases are decided on by a jury rather than a judge, that would be a step in the right direction.
Okay, fair enough. We'll be back with more on Rising.